The day my assistant Marcus whispered something in my parents' ear at the Golden Dragon restaurant, everything changed. One moment, my mother Linda was telling the entire dinner table how disappointed she was that I'd wasted my business degree on playing with computers, and the next, she was staring at Marcus like he'd just revealed the secret to eternal life. My father David, who hadn't spoken to me about my work in 3 years, suddenly couldn't stop asking questions. What Marcus told them that night would transform not just our family dinner, but the entire trajectory of my relationship with my parents. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Sarah Chen, and for 28 years, I've been the family disappointment. Not the dramatic, rebellious kind that makes for interesting stories, but the quiet, persistent kind that settles into your bones like Austin humidity in August. My older sister Jessica had always been the golden child, following the prescribed path with mathematical precision. Business degree from UT, MBA from Rice, corporate job at a Fortune 500 company, marriage to a lawyer, house in Westlake with the perfect lawn and 2 perfectly behaved children. She was everything my immigrant parents had dreamed of when they left Taiwan 30 years ago to build a better life in America. I, on the other hand, had taken my business degree and done something that horrified them. I'd started my own company. Pulse Creative wasn't born from some grand entrepreneurial vision or a burning desire to disrupt industries. It started in my cramped 1-bedroom apartment in South Austin 3 years ago, when I realized I was better at helping small businesses build their social media presence than any of the overpriced agencies they'd been hiring. My first client was a local coffee shop whose owner paid me in espresso drinks and $50 cash. Within 6 months, I had a waiting list. The irony wasn't lost on me that my parents, who had built their own American dream from nothing, couldn't understand why I'd want to do the same thing. They saw my work as frivolous, temporary, something I'd eventually outgrow when I came to my senses and joined the family restaurant business. The Golden Dragon had been their life's work, a traditional Taiwanese restaurant in Cedar Park that had fed the community for over 2 decades. They assumed it would be mine too. Every Sunday dinner at their house became a battlefield disguised as a family meal. My mother would set the table with her good china, the kind she'd brought from Taiwan and used only for special occasions and guilt trips. My father would carve the roast duck with surgical precision, while Jessica regaled us with stories of her latest promotion or her children's academic achievements. And I would sit there, scrolling through client emails on my phone, while they took turns explaining why my life choices were fundamentally wrong. "Sarah, you're 28 years old," my mother would say, her voice carrying that particular tone that managed to combine disappointment, concern, and judgment in equal measure. "When are you going to stop playing with computers and do something serious with your life?" "Marketing isn't playing, Mom," I'd respond, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "I have real clients. I'm helping real businesses grow." "Helping people waste money on Facebook," my father would mutter from behind his newspaper. "Anyone can post pictures on the internet. That's not a real job." Jessica would jump in with her perfectly reasonable older sister voice. "Sarah, I know a few people at my company who could get you an interview. It's not too late to get back on track. You're smart enough to succeed in corporate if you just applied yourself properly." The worst part wasn't their lack of understanding. It was the way they'd introduce me to their friends and other family members. "This is our daughter, Sarah. She does something with computers. We're hoping she'll grow out of it soon." Then they'd launch into detailed descriptions of Jessica's latest accomplishments, their voices bright with pride that never quite extended to me. I'd started bringing my laptop to family dinners, partly to work, and partly to have something to focus on besides the familiar sting of being the family's afterthought. That's how I met Marcus Rodriguez, though I didn't hire him immediately. He was working as a server at a restaurant near my co-working space downtown. And I'd noticed him because he had an uncanny ability to remember exactly how every regular customer liked their order, what they'd talked about the week before, and somehow make everyone feel like the most important person in the room. One afternoon, I was working on a particularly complex social media campaign for a tech startup, trying to balance my laptop, coffee, and phone while taking notes, when everything crashed to the floor in a spectacular cascade of chaos. Marcus appeared instantly, helping me gather scattered papers and somehow managing to save my laptop from disaster. "Rough day?" he asked, his smile genuine rather than polite. "Rough year," I admitted, then immediately regretted the honesty. I didn't usually share personal information with strangers, but something about his easy manner made me forget my usual boundaries. "What kind of work keeps you so busy?" he asked, as he helped me reorganize my materials. I gave him my standard explanation about digital marketing and social media strategy, expecting the usual glazed-over expression I got from most people. Instead, Marcus asked intelligent questions about client acquisition, content strategy, and measurement metrics. His questions weren't just polite conversation fillers, they demonstrated genuine understanding of business principles. "You seem to know a lot about marketing for someone in the restaurant industry," I observed. Marcus laughed, but not in an embarrassed way. "I have a business degree from St. Edward's. Restaurant work pays the bills while I figure out my next move. But I've been watching what you do here for months, and I have to say, your approach to client relationships is impressive." That conversation led to coffee the following week, which led to a job offer the week after that. Marcus became my first official employee, though calling him an assistant never felt quite right. He was more like a business partner who happened to handle scheduling, client communications, and the thousand small details that kept Pulse Creative running smoothly. What I hadn't expected was how much Marcus would understand about family dynamics, particularly the specific challenges of disappointing immigrant parents. His own family had immigrated from Mexico when he was 12, and he'd navigated similar expectations about career choices and definitions of success. "The thing about our parents," he told me one afternoon as we worked on a presentation for a potential client, "is that they sacrifice so much to give us opportunities they never had. Sometimes they can't see that the opportunities we choose aren't the ones they expected us to want." Marcus had a gift for reading people and situations that went far beyond customer service skills. He could tell when clients were hesitant about pricing before they voiced concerns, when team members were struggling with workload before they asked for help, and when I was having a particularly difficult week with family pressure before I mentioned it. As Pulse Creative grew, Marcus grew with it. He learned every aspect of our business, from content creation to client strategy to financial planning. He could speak intelligently about conversion rates and engagement metrics, but he could also make clients feel heard and valued in ways that pure technical expertise never could. He became the face of our company for many clients, the person they called when they had questions or concerns, the steady presence that made our rapid growth feel manageable. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. By our third year in business, Pulse Creative had a team of 8 people, an office in a trendy co-working space downtown, and a client roster that included several Austin tech companies and a growing number of national brands. We'd been featured in Austin Business Journal twice, and I'd been invited to speak at digital marketing conferences across Texas. By any reasonable measure, we were successful. But success in business didn't translate to success in family relationships. If anything, our growth seemed to make my parents more concerned rather than more proud. The bigger Pulse Creative became, the more they worried about what would happen. When my computer phase ended and I needed to find a real job, they'd started making increasingly pointed comments about the family restaurant, about how Jessica was too busy with her corporate career to help them modernize their operations, about how much they could use someone with business experience to help them navigate changing customer expectations. The pressure reached a breaking point the Sunday before Thanksgiving. I'd arrived at the family dinner exhausted from a week of client presentations and year-end planning, looking forward to a quiet evening with my family despite our usual tensions. Instead, I walked into what felt like an intervention. My parents had invited Carol Bennett, their longtime friend and a successful businesswoman who owned several Austin-area franchises. Jessica was there with her husband and children, all dressed perfectly for what was clearly intended to be more than a casual family dinner. The dining room table was set with my mother's finest dishes, the kind usually reserved for Chinese New Year or other major celebrations. "Sarah," my mother announced as I hung up my coat, "Carol has something exciting to discuss with you." Carol smiled with the practiced warmth of someone accustomed to making business pitches. "Your parents have been telling me about your little computer business. It sounds like you've learned some valuable skills that could be really useful in a more stable environment." The phrase, "little computer business," hit me like a physical blow, but I managed to keep my expression neutral as Carol continued her presentation. She was looking for someone to manage marketing and operations for her franchise locations, someone with business education and real-world experience. The salary she mentioned was impressive, the benefits package comprehensive, the job security, everything my parents had always wanted for me. "It would be perfect for you," Jessica added enthusiastically. "You could use all the skills you've developed in a company with real growth potential and financial backing." My father nodded approvingly. "Stable income, good benefits, opportunity for advancement. Everything you need to build a proper future." I looked around the table at their expectant faces, all convinced they were offering me something wonderful, something I should be grateful to receive. The worst part was knowing their intentions were loving, even if their understanding was limited. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully, "but I already have a business. Pulse Creative is doing well. We're profitable, growing, building something meaningful." "But sweetheart," my mother said gently, "this is a real opportunity. Carol's company has been successful for over 15 years. You could learn so much from her experience." "What happens when companies stop wanting to pay for Facebook posts?" my father asked. "This internet marketing thing is probably just a trend. Carol's business will still be here in 20 years. The conversation continued for another hour, with my family presenting increasingly compelling arguments for why I should abandon everything I'd built to take a job that would give them peace of mind about my future. They meant well, I knew that. But their inability to see my work as legitimate, valuable, or sustainable felt like a rejection of everything I'd accomplished. I left that dinner feeling more isolated from my family than ever before. The drive back to my apartment took me past the Golden Dragon, its red neon sign glowing warmly in the November darkness. I could see customers inside, families sharing meals, my parents' life work providing comfort and nourishment to their community. I understood why they were proud of what they'd built, why they wanted security and stability for their daughters. I just wished they could understand that I was trying to build something meaningful too. The following Monday, Marcus could tell something was wrong before I said a word. He'd learned to read my moods with uncanny accuracy, and the expression on my face when I walked into the office apparently told him everything he needed to know. "Family dinner?" he asked, not looking up from his computer screen. "Family intervention," I corrected, slumping into my desk chair, complete with outside expert and job offer. Marcus finally looked at me, his expression shifting from casual concern to focused attention. "Want to talk about it?" I found myself telling him the entire story, from Carol's job offer to my parents' conviction that I was wasting my education and potential on something frivolous and temporary. Marcus listened without interrupting, occasionally asking clarifying questions that helped me process the emotional complexity of loving people who couldn't seem to value what mattered most to me. "The thing that bothers me most," I concluded, "isn't that they don't understand digital marketing. It's that they can't see that I'm building something. We have real clients, real results, real impact on businesses. But to them, it's still just playing with computers. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring thoughtfully at his computer screen. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, as if he was working through an idea as he articulated it. "What if the problem isn't that they can't see the value in what we do?" he said slowly, "but that they can't see the scale of what we do? Your parents built a successful restaurant that serves their immediate community. In their world, business, success is measured by the customers you can see, the relationships you build face to face, the tangible impact you have on people's daily lives." He turned to face me fully. "They don't understand that we're doing the same thing, just at a different scale and through different channels. We're helping businesses build relationships with their communities, just like they did with the Golden Dragon. We're creating tangible value, just like they do with their food and service." Something in his words sparked an idea that had been forming in the back of my mind for weeks. Our client roster had grown to include several restaurants and food-related businesses, and I'd been thinking about how to better serve that particular sector. The Golden Dragon, with its established reputation and loyal customer base, could be a perfect case study for demonstrating how digital marketing could enhance, rather than replace traditional business practices. "Marcus," I said, the idea crystallizing as I spoke, "what would you think about offering to help my parents with the Golden Dragon's marketing? Not as a sales pitch, just as a family gesture. Show them what we actually do by doing it for them." His eyes lit up with understanding. "Prove the value by creating value they can see and measure directly." Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus and I developed a comprehensive digital marketing strategy for the Golden Dragon. We researched their current online presence, analyzed their customer demographics, identified opportunities for growth, and created a detailed plan for increasing their visibility and engagement with both existing and potential customers. The Golden Dragon had a basic website that hadn't been updated in years, virtually no social media presence, and was missing out on the entire ecosystem of online reviews, local search optimization, and community engagement that could significantly impact their business. But they also had something many of our clients lacked: decades of authentic customer relationships, genuine community connections, and a reputation for quality that just needed to be amplified rather than created. We put together a presentation that focused not on abstract concepts like engagement metrics and conversion rates, but on concrete outcomes: more customers during slow periods, better communication with regular customers, increased visibility for special events and seasonal menus, and tools for building on the community connections they'd already established. The plan was simple. I would ask my parents if we could present some ideas for the Golden Dragon, positioning it as a family contribution rather than a business proposal. Marcus would join me for the presentation, partly because he understood the strategy inside and out, but mostly because he had a gift for explaining complex concepts in ways that felt accessible and relevant. What I didn't anticipate was how nervous I would be about presenting to my own parents. I'd pitched to executive teams at major corporations without breaking a sweat, but the thought of trying to prove my professional worth to David and Linda Chen made my hands shake as I practiced. The presentation for the 5th time. "They're going to think we're trying to sell them something they don't need," I told Marcus as we drove to Cedar Park, for what I'd described to my parents as a casual Sunday dinner with a small business discussion. "We're not selling them anything," Marcus reminded me. "We're showing them what their daughter does for a living." The Golden Dragon was closed on Sundays, so we met my parents at the restaurant rather than their house. I'd thought a professional setting might help them see the conversation differently, and I was hoping the familiar environment would help me feel more confident about presenting ideas for their business. My parents were waiting for us in the main dining room, dressed in their usual Sunday clothes, but with the slightly formal posture they adopted for business meetings. They greeted Marcus politely, clearly curious about why I'd brought my assistant to a family discussion. "Mom, Dad," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "Marcus and I have been talking about the Golden Dragon, about how successful you've been in building relationships with your customers and establishing yourselves as part of the Cedar Park community." My father nodded cautiously, unsure where the conversation was heading. "We were wondering if you'd be interested in seeing some ideas for how digital marketing could help you reach even more people who would appreciate what you've built here," I continued, pulling out my laptop and the printed presentation materials we'd prepared. For the next 45 minutes, Marcus and I walked my parents through our strategy for the Golden Dragon. We showed them how online reviews could amplify the word-of-mouth recommendations they'd been receiving for 20 years. We demonstrated how social media could showcase their authentic family recipes and cooking techniques, connecting with people who valued traditional food preparation. We explained how local search optimization could help community members discover them more easily, and how digital tools could strengthen rather than replace the personal relationships that were the foundation of their success. Marcus had an intuitive understanding of how to present technical concepts in terms my parents could relate to. When he explained social media engagement, he compared it to the way regular customers brought their friends to try the Golden Dragon's food. When he described online reputation management, he related it to the way satisfied customers had always been their best source of new business. But the moment that changed everything came when Marcus pulled out his phone and showed my parents, something I hadn't seen before. He'd been quietly documenting our work with other clients, creating a portfolio that demonstrated the real-world impact of our strategies. "Mr. and Mrs. Chen?" Marcus said, his voice carrying a respect and warmth that immediately got their attention. "I want to show you something about your daughter that you might not realize." He scrolled through case studies on his phone, showing before and after metrics for restaurants and small businesses we'd worked with. A family-owned bakery that had increased their weekend sales by 60%. A traditional Mexican restaurant that had doubled their catering business. A small grocery store that had built a loyal online community around their locally sourced products. "Sarah doesn't just help businesses post on social media," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. "She helps family businesses like yours connect with their communities in ways that honor their traditions while reaching new customers. She understands that real businesses are built on relationships, and everything she does is designed to strengthen and expand those relationships." He looked directly at my parents, and I could see them listening in a way they'd never listened. When I tried to explain my work. "The bakery I showed you? The owner was about to close after 30 years because foot traffic was declining. Sarah's strategy didn't just save their business, it helped them pass it on to the next generation." "The Mexican restaurant?" The family had been struggling to compete with chain restaurants, but Sarah helped them showcase what made them special, what made them worth choosing over cheaper alternatives. Marcus paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Your daughter has a gift for understanding what makes businesses special, for helping them communicate their value to people who will appreciate it. She's built a company that helps families preserve and grow the legacies they've worked so hard to create." The silence that followed felt different from the usual uncomfortable quiet of our family business discussions. My parents were looking at Marcus with the kind of focused attention they usually reserved for important customers or serious conversations. My mother was the first to speak, her voice softer than usual. "Show me that bakery example again." For the next hour, my parents asked detailed questions about our work, our clients, our methods. They wanted to understand conversion rates and engagement metrics, but in terms of customer relationships and business growth. They asked about pricing models and contract structures, but in the context of how we helped businesses succeed long-term. Most surprisingly, they began asking about my role specifically. What kinds of decisions did I make? How did I develop strategies for different types of businesses? What had I learned about helping family businesses navigate challenges they'd never faced before? "Sarah," my father said finally, using the tone he reserved for serious business discussions, Why didn't you ever explain your work this way before? The question caught me off guard. I tried to, Dad. I've been trying to explain what I do for 3 years. No, he said, shaking his head slowly. You told us about computers and social media and marketing. Marcus showed us how you help families build their futures. My mother nodded in agreement. We didn't understand that your work was about relationships and community. We thought it was just technology. As we prepared to leave that evening, my parents asked if we would consider developing a full marketing plan for the Golden Dragon, as a business arrangement rather than a family favor. They wanted to hire Pulse Creative as their marketing consultants, to pay our standard rates, to be one of our official clients. But more than that, they wanted to understand what I'd built, to see Pulse Creative's offices, to meet the rest of our team. They wanted to know about our other clients, our growth plans, our vision for the future. The drive back to Austin felt different than any family visit I could remember. Marcus and I talked about the presentation, about my parents' questions, about the shift in their understanding that had been so visible and so sudden. What did you say to them? I asked as we approached downtown. I mean, I've been trying to explain my work for years, but somehow you made them see it in a way I never could. Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering the question carefully. I think the difference, he said finally, is that you were trying to justify what you do. I was just describing what you do. When you're always having to prove that your work is valuable, it's hard to communicate the actual value clearly. He was right, I realized. I'd been so focused on defending my career choices that I'd never simply demonstrated their impact. I'd been trying to convince my parents that digital marketing was legitimate rather than showing them how it created real results for real businesses. The transformation in my relationship with my parents didn't happen overnight, but it began that Sunday evening at the Golden Dragon. Over the following weeks, they called with questions about their marketing plan, about our other clients, about the business decisions I was making as Pulse Creative continued to grow. My mother started following our company's social media accounts, commenting enthusiastically on our client success stories. My father began referring potential clients to us, restaurants and small businesses in their network who were struggling, with exactly the challenges we specialized in solving. Most remarkably, they began talking about my work with the same pride they'd always shown for Jessica's corporate achievements. At family dinners, they started asking about our latest clients, our growth metrics, our expansion plans. They wanted to understand the details of our business, to offer advice based on their own entrepreneurial experience, to be genuinely involved in what I was building. The Golden Dragon became one of our most successful case studies, not just because of the measurable results we achieved, but because of what it represented about the power of understanding and communication. Within 6 months of implementing our digital marketing strategy, they'd increased their weekend reservations by 40%, built a social media following of engaged local food enthusiasts, and established themselves as one of Cedar Park's most recommended restaurants on review platforms. But beyond the business metrics, something more important had changed. My parents finally understood that I wasn't playing with computers or chasing trends. I was building relationships, creating value, helping families strengthen and grow the businesses they'd worked so hard to establish. The Sunday that Marcus whispered in my parents' ear wasn't really about whispering at all. It was about translation, about finding the right language to communicate value in terms people could understand and appreciate. Marcus hadn't told them anything about me that wasn't true before that evening. He'd simply found a way to help them see what had always been there. The Monday morning after our Golden Dragon presentation, I arrived at the office with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. For the first time since starting Pulse Creative, I felt like my parents truly understood what I was building. The way they'd asked questions, taken notes, even requested a formal proposal. It felt like vindication of everything I'd worked toward. That optimism lasted exactly 47 minutes. Marcus was already at his desk when I walked in, but something in his posture immediately set off alarm bells. He was staring at his computer screen with the kind of focused intensity that usually meant crisis management. When he looked up at me, his expression was carefully neutral. The look he wore when he was trying not to panic me about something. Serious. "We need to talk," he said simply, gesturing toward my office. I followed him, noting the way Ashley and our other team members seemed unusually quiet for a Monday morning. The energy in the office felt subdued, almost funeral-like, which was completely at odds with the celebratory mood I'd expected after yesterday's breakthrough with my parents. Marcus closed my office door behind us and handed me his laptop. The screen was an email from Robert Martinez, the potential investor we'd been courting for 6 months. Robert represented exactly the kind of partnership that could take Pulse Creative to the next level. Significant funding, strategic connections, and validation from someone with serious credibility in the Austin business community. I'd met Robert through Patricia Williams, my mentor and one of the few people who'd supported my entrepreneurial ambitions from the beginning. Patricia had built and sold 2 successful marketing agencies, and her endorsement carried weight with investors, like Robert, who were looking for the next generation of promising companies. Our pitch to Robert had gone exceptionally well 3 weeks earlier. He'd been impressed by our client roster, our growth trajectory, and what he called our authentic approach to digital relationship building. He'd asked detailed questions about our business model, our team structure, our plans for scaling, and our vision for the future of small business marketing. Marcus and I had spent weeks preparing for that meeting, creating detailed financial projections, client case studies, and strategic growth plans. We'd presented everything professionally, answered his questions thoroughly, and left feeling confident that we'd made a strong impression. Now, staring at Robert's email, I felt that confidence crumble like a house of cards in a windstorm. "Sarah," the email began, "thank you for the comprehensive presentation and the time you invested in helping me understand Pulse Creative's operations. After careful consideration and consultation with my advisory team, I've decided not to move forward with an investment at this time." The polite language that followed was the kind of professional rejection that somehow hurt more than blunt. Honesty would have. Robert praised our enthusiasm and creativity while expressing concerns about our long-term sustainability in an increasingly competitive market. He commended our grassroots approach, while questioning whether we had the strategic vision necessary for significant scaling. But the line that hit hardest was buried in the middle of the second paragraph. "While I appreciate the personal passion driving this venture, I'm not convinced that Pulse Creative represents the kind of systematic, replicable business model that would appeal to serious growth investors." Personal passion. The phrase felt like a dismissal of everything we'd built, reducing our success to some kind of hobby project driven by emotion rather than business acumen. It was the professional equivalent of my parents calling my work playing with computers. A polite way of saying our achievements weren't real or sustainable. I read the email twice, then looked up at Marcus, who was watching my reaction with obvious concern. "There's more," he said quietly, pulling up another email on his phone. "Patricia called this morning. Robert reached out to her after sending this, wanting to understand what he might have missed in his evaluation." Marcus hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with what he was about to share. According to Patricia, Robert's concerns weren't really about our business model or growth potential. He'd already decided we were a solid investment opportunity. But then he started asking around about us, getting additional perspectives from other people in the Austin business community. A cold feeling was forming in my stomach. What kind of perspectives? "The kind that come from people who think they know you better than they actually do," Marcus said carefully. "Robert mentioned to Patricia that he'd heard from someone that you were still figuring out what you want to do with your life, and that your business was more like an expensive learning experience than a serious company." The words hit me, like a physical blow. I knew immediately where those characterizations had come from, and the betrayal felt worse than the actual rejection. "Jessica," I said quietly. Marcus nodded grimly. Patricia thinks so too. She said Robert mentioned getting input from someone close to your family, who suggested that your parents were concerned about your long-term commitment to entrepreneurship. I sank into my desk chair, trying to process the full scope of what had happened. My sister, the one person in my family I'd thought might eventually understand my choices, even if she didn't agree with them, had apparently undermined the most important business opportunity of my career. How would Jessica even know about Robert? I asked, though part of me already suspected the answer. Remember when we were preparing for the pitch meeting, and you mentioned it at Sunday dinner a few weeks ago? Marcus said. You were excited about the potential partnership, talking about what it could mean for our growth plans. I did remember. It had been one of the few times I'd shared professional good news with my family, hoping they might be proud of the progress we were making. Jessica had asked thoughtful questions about the investment process, seeming genuinely interested in understanding how startup funding worked. Now I realized she hadn't been asking out of curiosity or support. She'd been gathering information. Why would she do this? I asked. Though even as I said it, I understood the answer. Jessica had always been protective of our parents, always worried about anything that might disappoint or stress them. In her mind, she was probably protecting them from the inevitable failure of my unrealistic business venture. Marcus sat down across from my desk, his expression shifting from sympathy to something more determined. The question isn't why she did it, he said. The question is what we do about it. I looked at him, confused. What do you mean? Robert's made his decision. Even if we could prove that Jessica's interference influenced him, it's not like we can force him to invest. No, Marcus agreed. But we can prove that his concerns were based on incomplete and biased information. Over the next hour, Marcus outlined an idea that was both audacious and brilliant. Instead of trying to defend ourselves against the characterizations that had influenced Robert's decision, we would demonstrate their inaccuracy through action. Marcus had been tracking our metrics meticulously since joining the company, and he'd identified patterns in our growth that even I hadn't fully recognized. We weren't just successful. We were systematically, measurably, replicably successful. Our client retention rate was 93%. Our average client saw measurable improvement in their key business metrics within 60 days. We had a waiting list of potential clients and had turned down more business than most agencies our size ever had the opportunity to pursue. The problem, Marcus explained, isn't that our business model doesn't work. It's that we haven't been communicating our success in terms that investors like Robert understand. He showed me a presentation he'd been working on, a comprehensive analysis of our operations that positioned Pulse Creative not as a scrappy startup driven by personal passion, but as a systematically successful business with a proven methodology for helping small and medium-sized businesses achieve sustainable growth. The data was impressive, even to me. We'd helped our clients generate over $2 million in additional revenue in the past year alone. Our strategies had measurable, repeatable results across different industries and business sizes. We had systems, processes, and protocols that could absolutely be scaled and replicated. We've been thinking about this wrong, Marcus continued. We don't need Robert's investment to prove that we're successful. We need to be so obviously successful that investors start coming to us. His plan was ambitious. Instead of pursuing other investors immediately, we would spend the next 6 months documenting and systematizing our success in ways that would be impossible to dismiss or mischaracterize. We would create case studies that demonstrated clear return on investment. We would develop frameworks that other agencies could license. We would position ourselves not as a local Austin marketing company, but as a methodology that could be applied anywhere. But first, we had to address the damage that had already been done to our reputation in the local business community. Robert isn't the only investor Jessica might have influenced, Marcus pointed out. If she's been talking to people about your expensive learning experience, that perception could be spreading to other potential partners or clients. The thought made me sick. How many opportunities had we lost because my own sister was undermining our credibility behind the scenes? How many people in Austin's business community saw me as a dilettante playing with her parents' money, rather than a serious entrepreneur building something valuable? Marcus must have seen the despair on my face because his voice became gentler, more encouraging. Sarah, what Jessica told Robert wasn't true 3 years ago, and it's definitely not true now. You've built something real, something valuable, something that changes people's lives and businesses for the better. The numbers prove it. Our clients prove it. The fact that we have more work than we can handle proves it. He was right, but the emotional impact of the betrayal was harder to shake than the business concerns. I'd always known my family didn't fully understand my work, but I'd assumed their skepticism came from ignorance rather than active sabotage. I need to talk to Jessica, I said finally. Marcus nodded. You do, but not from a defensive position. Talk to her from a position of strength, with evidence of what you've actually accomplished. That evening, I drove to Jessica's house in Westlake, armed with a portfolio of our recent successes and a determination to understand why my sister had tried to destroy the most important opportunity of my professional life. Jessica's house was everything my parents had always hoped I'd aspire to. Large, professionally landscaped, located in one of Austin's most prestigious neighborhoods. Her husband's BMW was parked next to her Mercedes in the circular driveway, and warm light spilled from the windows of their perfectly appointed living room. When Jessica answered the door, she seemed genuinely surprised to see me. We rarely visited each other without advance planning, and my unannounced appearance clearly caught her off guard. Sarah, is everything okay? Are Mom and Dad all right? They're fine, I said. I need to talk to you about Robert Martinez. Something shifted in Jessica's expression, not guilt exactly, but a kind of defensive wariness that confirmed my suspicions. Come in, she said, stepping aside to let me enter. David's putting the kids to bed, so we have a few minutes. Jessica's living room looked like something from a home design magazine, all neutral colors and expensive furniture arranged in perfect symmetry. We sat across from each other on her cream-colored sofa, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Robert decided not to invest in Pulse Creative, I said finally. Jessica's face remained carefully neutral. I'm sorry to hear that. I know you were excited about the possibility. He told my mentor that someone close to my family had expressed concerns about my long-term commitment to entrepreneurship. Now Jessica had the grace to look uncomfortable, but she didn't deny the implication. Sarah, she said carefully, I was trying to protect you. And Mom and Dad. Protect us from what exactly? Jessica sighed, settling back into her sofa, with the posture of someone preparing for a difficult conversation. From disappointment, from financial disaster, from the inevitable moment when your marketing company fails and you're left with nothing to show for years of work except debt and a gap in your resume. Her words were matter of fact, delivered without malice but with absolute conviction. She genuinely believed that my business was doomed to fail and that her interference had been a favor rather than a betrayal. Jessica, Pulse Creative isn't failing. We're profitable, growing, successful by any reasonable measure. For now, she agreed. But Sarah, you're competing against established agencies with millions of dollars in backing, with teams of experienced professionals, with client relationships that go back decades. How long do you really think you can survive in that environment? I pulled out the portfolio Marcus and I had prepared, spreading client case studies and financial reports across her coffee table. Look at these numbers, I said. Look at what we've accomplished for our clients. Look at our retention rates, our growth metrics, our profitability. Jessica glanced at the materials politely but without real interest. The way someone might look at vacation photos from a trip they had no desire to take. "I'm not questioning whether you've had some early success," she said. "But success in business isn't just about good intentions or even good results. It's about sustainability, scalability, competitive advantage. It's about building something that can survive market changes and economic downturns. And you don't think I can do that?" "I think you're talented and hardworking and creative," Jessica said, her voice taking on the patient tone she used with her children when explaining why they couldn't have ice cream for dinner. "But I also think you're naive about how difficult it is to build a lasting business." She gestured around her perfectly appointed living room. "David and I have financial security because we made conservative choices, because we built our careers within established systems with proven track records. We have retirement savings, college funds for the kids, equity in appreciating assets. What do you have? A rented office space and clients who could leave at any time?" The question stung because it touched on fears I'd been trying not to examine too closely. Pulse Creative was successful, but it was also dependent on my personal involvement in ways that sometimes felt overwhelming. If something happened to me, or if key clients decided to take their business elsewhere, how stable would our success really be? But acknowledging those concerns didn't mean accepting Jessica's conclusion that my entire enterprise was fundamentally doomed. "Every business has risks," I said. "Mom and Dad took risks when they opened the Golden Dragon. You take risks every time you accept a new position or investment. Those are calculated risks within established frameworks," Jessica countered. "What you're doing is essentially gambling with your future on the hope that people will continue to pay premium prices for something they could get cheaper elsewhere." The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, but it became increasingly clear that Jessica and I were operating from fundamentally different definitions of success, security, and risk. She saw my entrepreneurial efforts as reckless self-indulgence. I saw her corporate career as soul-crushing conformity. What hurt most wasn't that we disagreed about business philosophy. It was that she'd taken active steps to undermine my work, without ever talking to me about her concerns directly. "Why didn't you come to me if you were worried?" I asked finally. "Why talk to Robert behind my back instead of having this conversation with me months ago?" Jessica looked genuinely confused by the question. "Because I knew you wouldn't listen," she said. "You're convinced that your way is right, that everyone who questions your choices just doesn't understand your vision. When have you ever taken advice from anyone in our family about business decisions?" She had a point, though not the one she thought she was making. I hadn't taken business advice from my family because they'd never offered advice. Only criticism, skepticism, and pressure to abandon my goals in favor of theirs. But Jessica's perspective helped me understand something important about the broader pattern of dismissal I'd been experiencing. It wasn't just that people didn't understand what I was doing. It was that they couldn't imagine a version of success that looked different from what they'd achieved themselves. Robert Martinez had built his wealth through traditional investment strategies, buying into established companies with proven business models. Jessica had built her security through corporate advancement within large, stable organizations. My parents had built their American dream through a traditional small business model. None of them could envision a path to success that didn't follow the patterns they understood and trusted. When I left Jessica's house that night, I felt clearer about the challenge I was facing than I had in months. The problem wasn't that my business was failing or unsustainable. The problem was that I was trying to prove my success to people who were using the wrong metrics to evaluate it. Marcus was waiting for me at the office when I returned, working, late on the presentation that would become our new strategic foundation. When I walked in, he looked up expectantly. "How did it go?" "About as well as expected," I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "She's not malicious, just convinced that I'm deluding myself about business realities." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "So, what's our next move?" I looked around our office, at the client success stories on the walls, at the workspace we'd built for our growing team, at the evidence of everything we'd accomplished in 3 years. We stopped trying to convince people who aren't ready to be convinced, I said, and we start showing results that are too obvious to ignore. The next morning, Marcus and I began implementing the most ambitious phase of Pulse Creative's evolution. Instead of chasing investors who saw us as a risky bet, we would become the kind of company that investors competed to work with. Instead of defending our business model to family members who couldn't understand it, we would build success so substantial and systematic that understanding would become irrelevant. And instead of trying to fit into other people's definitions of legitimate business, we would create our own category entirely. The sting. The weeks following Robert's rejection and my confrontation with Jessica felt like navigating through fog. Every morning, I'd wake up with renewed determination to prove that Pulse Creative was more than just a personal passion project. But by evening, doubt would creep back in like water through cracks in a foundation. The worst part wasn't the financial setback, though losing Robert's potential investment did force us to scale back some growth plans. The worst part was the way the rejection had planted seeds of self-doubt that I couldn't seem to shake. No matter how much evidence I had of our success. Marcus noticed the change immediately. He'd developed an almost supernatural ability to read my moods, and he could tell when I was spiraling into what he'd started calling my imposter syndrome episodes. These were the days when I'd spend hours second-guessing decisions that had proven successful, reviewing client work for flaws that existed only in my imagination, and questioning whether I was actually qualified to be running a business at all. "You know," Marcus said one particularly difficult Wednesday morning, finding me staring blankly at my computer screen instead of working on a client presentation, "there's something my business school professor used to say about entrepreneurship. That might help." I looked up, grateful for any distraction from the loop of negative thoughts I'd been cycling through. He said that the hardest part of building a business isn't the actual building. It's maintaining belief in your vision when everyone around you is telling you it won't work, it's too risky, it's not practical, it's not realistic. Marcus pulled up a chair next to my desk, settling in for what I recognized as one of his informal therapy sessions disguised as business discussions. The professor called it reality distortion field. The ability to maintain unwavering belief in something that doesn't exist yet, even when smart, well-meaning people are presenting compelling arguments for why it can't or shouldn't exist. "That sounds dangerously close to delusion," I pointed out. "Sometimes," Marcus agreed. "But the difference between productive delusion and destructive delusion is evidence. Are you ignoring reality or are you seeing potential that other people miss?" He gestured toward our client wall, where we'd mounted framed testimonials and case studies from businesses we'd helped transform. "Sarah, that bakery we saved from closing, that family restaurant that doubled their catering business, the grocery store that built a community around local sourcing, those aren't delusions. Those are real businesses with real results that exist, because you could see possibilities that their owners couldn't see themselves." Marcus was right, intellectually. But emotional doubt doesn't respond to logical arguments, and the sting of Jessica's betrayal and Robert's rejection had created a wound that facts couldn't heal. The doubt manifested in different ways throughout each day. I'd second-guess strategic recommendations I'd made confidently for months. I'd revise client presentations obsessively, adding unnecessary details and explanations as if more information could somehow make up for my perceived lack of credibility. I'd find myself apologizing for things that didn't require apologies, prefacing confident statements with qualifiers like "I think," or "maybe," or "it might be worth considering." Ashley noticed it too. During our weekly team meeting, she pulled me aside with concerns that went beyond business operations. "Boss," she said, using the affectionate title she'd adopted when she joined our team, "you've been different lately. More anxious, less decisive. Is everything okay?" Ashley had been with us for 8 months, and she'd joined Pulse Creative specifically because she'd been impressed by my leadership style during the interview process. She'd told me later that she'd left her previous job partly because her former boss had been indecisive and constantly sought validation for obvious decisions. "I'm fine," I told her, which was both true and completely false. I was functioning. Fine, meeting deadlines and serving clients effectively. But I wasn't fine emotionally, and that internal struggle was apparently more visible than I'd realized. "You know," Ashley said carefully, "when I was deciding whether to take this job, I researched your background pretty thoroughly. I read everything I could find about Pulse Creative, looked up client testimonials, even talked to people in the industry who knew your work." She paused, choosing her words thoughtfully. "Everyone I spoke with said the same thing, that you had an unusual combination of strategic insight and genuine care for client success. They said you made business decisions like someone who truly understood that your client's success was your success." Ashley looked at me directly, her expression serious. "That person hasn't disappeared, but she's been harder to find lately. And I think it's because someone convinced you to doubt what you already know to be true about your own abilities." Her observation was painfully accurate. I had been operating from a defensive position, trying to prove my competence instead of exercising it naturally. The confidence that had carried me through 3 years of business building had been replaced by a constant need for validation. But understanding the problem didn't immediately solve it. The doubt had taken root, and it would take more than recognition to overcome it. The turning point came during a client meeting that should have been routine. We were presenting a quarterly review to Maria Santos, the owner of a small chain of authentic Mexican restaurants who'd become one of our most successful case studies. Under our guidance, Maria's business had expanded from struggling to keep one location profitable to opening 2 additional restaurants and developing a thriving catering operation. The meeting should have been a celebration. Our strategy had exceeded every goal Maria had set, and she'd become one of our most enthusiastic referral sources. But instead of presenting our results with the confidence they deserved, I found myself apologizing for things that were actually successes. "I'm sorry we weren't able to achieve higher engagement rates on Instagram," I said, despite the fact that we'd exceeded industry benchmarks by 30%. "I wish we could have moved faster on the catering website development," I continued, though we'd delivered it 2 weeks ahead of schedule. "Maybe we should have pushed harder for more local media coverage," I added, even though Maria had been featured in Austin Monthly and the Austin American-Statesman within the same quarter. Maria looked increasingly confused as I continued undermining our objectively excellent results. Finally, she interrupted me mid-apology. "Sarah, what's going on? Are you trying to fire me as a client?" The question caught me completely off guard. "What? No, of course not. Why would you think that?" "Because you're sitting here apologizing for the best quarter my business has ever had," Maria said bluntly. "You're acting like you failed when you've actually succeeded beyond my wildest expectations." She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through photos. "Look," she said, showing me pictures from the grand opening of her 3rd location. "A year ago, I was wondering if I'd have to close my original restaurant. Now I'm employing 43 people across 3 locations, and I have a waiting list for catering events." Maria's voice grew stronger as she continued. "You didn't just help me save my business. You helped me build the future I'd dreamed about but never thought was possible. And now you're sitting here acting like that's not good enough?" The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, but the dynamic had completely shifted. Instead of me presenting our results to Maria, she spent the time telling me about the impact our work had had on her family, her employees, her community. "My daughter wants to study business now because she's seen what's possible when you have the right strategy and support," Maria said. "My mother, who thought I was crazy for trying to expand, now tells everyone about her daughter who owns 3 restaurants." As Maria described the ripple effects of our work together, I began to see Pulse Creative's impact from a perspective I'd lost in the fog of self-doubt. We weren't just helping businesses optimize their marketing metrics. We were helping families build legacies, helping communities access authentic experiences, helping entrepreneurs achieve dreams they'd thought were unrealistic. After Maria left, I sat in my office trying to process the disconnect between the way she saw our work and the way I'd been presenting it. Somewhere in the weeks following Robert's rejection, I'd stopped seeing our success clearly. Marcus knocked on my doorframe, holding 2 cups of coffee, and wearing the expression he used when he had something important to discuss. "Can we talk about what just happened in there?" I gestured for him to come in, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I screwed up that presentation pretty badly, didn't I?" "You didn't screw up the results," Marcus said carefully, "but you definitely screwed up the presentation. Sarah, you were apologizing for outcomes that most agencies would use as their primary case studies." He sat down across from my desk, setting his coffee cup down with the deliberate care that meant he was preparing to say something I might not want to hear. "I think Robert's rejection affected you more than you've admitted, even to yourself." Marcus was right, though I'd been trying to convince myself that I'd moved past the disappointment. The rejection had shaken something fundamental in my self-perception, creating doubt about judgments I'd trusted for years. "It's not just Robert," I admitted. "It's the whole pattern. Jessica thinking I'm naive, my parents worrying about my future, investors seeing my business as a risky hobby project. Sometimes I wonder if they're all seeing something I'm missing." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring thoughtfully at his coffee cup. "Can I tell you something about the day I decided to ask you for a job?" I nodded, curious about where he was going with this. "I'd been watching you work in that coffee shop for months, and what impressed me wasn't your technical skills or your client results, though those were obviously strong. What impressed me was the way you approached problems." He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "Most people, when they're trying to solve a business challenge, start by figuring out what's realistic, what's been done before, what's likely to work. You started by figuring out what would actually serve your clients best, and then you figured out how to make that realistic." Marcus leaned forward, his voice gaining intensity. "That's not naive thinking, Sarah. That's visionary thinking. And the reason some people can't recognize the difference is that they've never experienced what it's like to work with someone who puts client success ahead of conventional wisdom." His words helped, but they also highlighted something I'd been avoiding acknowledging. The doubt wasn't just about business metrics or external validation. It was about identity. For 3 years, I'd defined myself as someone who could see opportunities others missed, who could build solutions that seemed impossible until they worked. Now I was questioning whether that self-perception had been accurate or just arrogant self-delusion. "Marcus," I said quietly, "what if they're right? What if I've been operating on false confidence this whole time?" "Then Maria Santos is hallucinating. Her 3 restaurants," Marcus replied without hesitation. "And the bakery that was about to close is imagining their 60% increase in weekend sales. And all our other clients are collectively deluding themselves about the results they've seen." He stood up, moving to our client wall and pointing to specific testimonials. "Sarah, these people didn't hire us because they believed in your vision. They hired us because your vision produced results they could measure and bank. They're not invested in making you feel good about yourself. They're invested in growing their businesses." Marcus turned back to face me, his expression serious, but gentle. "The difference between confidence and arrogance is results. And we have 3 years of results that prove your instincts are not only accurate, but consistently more accurate than what people in our industry consider conventional wisdom." Over the following days, I began the difficult work of rebuilding confidence that had been undermined by rejection and criticism. It wasn't a matter of ignoring negative feedback or dismissing legitimate concerns. It was about learning to distinguish between productive criticism that could help me improve and destructive criticism that was based on limited understanding or different values. Robert's rejection, for example, contained some valid points about the challenges of scaling a service-based business. But his fundamental assumption that personal passion was incompatible with systematic business success was simply wrong, and our client results proved it. Jessica's concerns about financial security and career stability were understandable given her background and priorities. But her inability to imagine successful entrepreneurship outside traditional corporate frameworks didn't make my path inherently invalid. My parents' worries about my future were loving and natural, but their definition of security was based on their generational experience and might not apply to contemporary economic realities. The process of rebuilding confidence was helped enormously by Marcus's decision to document our success more systematically. He created detailed case studies that went beyond simple before and after metrics to show the full scope of transformation our clients experienced. "Look at this," he said one afternoon, showing me a comprehensive report he'd compiled. "We don't just help businesses increase revenue. We help them build sustainable competitive advantages, develop deeper community connections, and create operations that align with their values." The data was impressive, but what struck me most was the way Marcus had organized it. Instead of focusing primarily on our achievements, he'd structured the analysis around our clients' transformations. The story wasn't about how smart or skilled we were. It was about how our approach enabled other people to achieve their goals more effectively. That shift in perspective was crucial for overcoming the self-doubt that had paralyzed me. Instead of trying to prove my worth as an entrepreneur, I could focus on demonstrating the value of our approach to client success. The confidence began, returning gradually, like feeling coming back to a limb that had fallen asleep. I started making strategic recommendations without excessive hedging. I presented client results without apologizing for things that were actually successes. I began speaking about Pulse Creative's future with the certainty that had originally attracted our best clients and team members. But the real test came when Ashley approached me with an opportunity that would require significant confidence in our capabilities. "I've been talking to some friends in Dallas," she said during one of our weekly team meetings. "There are several businesses there that are struggling with exactly the kind of challenges we specialize in solving." Ashley had been researching the Dallas market for weeks, identifying potential clients and analyzing the competitive landscape. "The thing is, they're not just looking for a marketing consultant. They want someone who can help them completely reimagine their approach to customer relationships and community engagement." She looked at me directly, her expression both excited and challenging. It would mean expanding into a new market, taking on more complex projects, basically proving that our methodology works outside the Austin ecosystem we know so well. The old me, the confident version who had started Pulse Creative 3 years earlier, would have been excited by the challenge. The recent me, the one still recovering from rejection and doubt, felt intimidated by the risk and complexity. But as I considered Ashley's proposal, I realized that this was exactly the kind of opportunity that would either confirm my restored confidence or reveal that I was still operating from a position of fear. "Tell me more about the specific businesses and challenges," I said, surprising myself with how natural the decision felt. For the next hour, Ashley walked me through her research, describing opportunities that were ambitious but clearly within our capabilities. As she talked, I found myself automatically thinking in terms of strategy and solutions rather than risks and obstacles. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. The doubt that had clouded my thinking for weeks was clearing, replaced by the analytical excitement that had always driven my best work. Marcus, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke up. "So we're really considering this? Expanding to Dallas?" I looked around the room at our small but dedicated team, at the office we'd built together, at the evidence of everything we'd accomplished. "I think we're beyond considering it," I said. "I think we're planning it." The sting of rejection had been real and painful, but it had also been temporary. What remained was the foundation of success we'd built through consistent results, genuine client relationships, and a methodology that worked regardless of external validation. As we began planning our Dallas expansion, I realized that the period of doubt had actually strengthened our business in unexpected ways. The process of questioning our assumptions had forced us to document our success more thoroughly, articulate our methodology more clearly, and understand our competitive advantages more precisely. Most importantly, it had taught me that confidence, built on real results, is more durable than confidence built on external approval. Robert Martinez could reject our investment proposal. Jessica could undermine our reputation, and family members could question our sustainability. But none of that could change the fact that we'd created real value for real clients through systematic, repeatable processes. The doubt would probably return in different forms as we faced new challenges. But now I understood that doubt was just information, not truth. And the best response to doubt was not defensive arguments, but continued evidence of success. The pattern emerges. The Dallas expansion revealed something I hadn't anticipated. The challenges I'd experienced with Robert Martinez and Jessica weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a larger pattern of how people responded to business models that didn't fit traditional categories. Our first potential client in Dallas was Rebecca Thompson, who owned a chain of boutique fitness studios that had been struggling to differentiate themselves in an increasingly crowded market. Rebecca had been referred to us by one of Ashley's contacts, and our initial phone consultation had gone exceptionally well. She understood immediately how our approach could help her build stronger community connections and more sustainable growth. But when we arrived for our in-person presentation, Rebecca's entire advisory team was present. Her accountant, her lawyer, her business mentor, and her husband, who was also her business partner. What should have been a collaborative strategy session became something that felt more like a cross-examination. "So you're telling us that social media marketing is going to solve our retention problems?" asked the accountant, a stern-faced man who'd clearly decided we were overpriced before we'd even begun presenting. "Actually," Marcus responded calmly, "we're recommending a comprehensive community engagement strategy that uses digital tools to strengthen the relationships Rebecca's already building with her clients." "That sounds like expensive consultant talk for posting on Instagram," the lawyer interjected, not bothering to hide his skepticism. I recognized the dynamic immediately. The drive back to Austin from Dallas felt like the longest 4 hours of my life. Marcus and I had barely spoken since leaving Rebecca's office, both of us processing what had just happened in our own ways. The silence wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it was heavy with unspoken thoughts and questions about what this meant for our expansion plans. Rebecca had wanted to hire us. That much had been clear from her body language, her questions, and the way she'd engaged with our presentation. But her advisory team had systematically dismantled every aspect of our proposal, not through legitimate business concerns, but through what I was beginning to recognize as a fundamental inability to understand value that didn't fit their preconceived categories. "We need to think about this more carefully," Rebecca had said finally, after her accountant had spent 20 minutes explaining why digital marketing was a waste of money, and her lawyer had questioned whether our contract terms were industry standard. The disappointment in her voice was obvious, but so was her resignation to the pressure from people she trusted. As we merged onto I-35 South, Marcus finally broke the silence. "That wasn't about our proposal," he said quietly. "I know." Rebecca understood exactly what we were offering and why it would work for her business. "I know." Her advisors had made up their minds before we walked into the room. I nodded, keeping my eyes on the road. The frustration I felt wasn't about losing one potential client. It was about recognizing a pattern that seemed to follow us wherever we went. Over the past 6 months, we'd encountered similar resistance from multiple sources. Potential investors who dismissed our approach as too niche, established agencies who criticized our methodology as unprofessional, even some clients existing advisors who questioned whether our results were sustainable long-term. At first, I'd attributed each instance to individual circumstances or personality conflicts. Robert Martinez was conservative about investments. Jessica was protective of our parents. Rebecca's advisors were naturally cautious about new expenses. But now I was seeing something more systematic at work. We weren't just facing skepticism about our specific business model. We were encountering resistance to the very idea that success could be achieved through approaches that differed from established norms. "Marcus," I said as we passed the exit for Round Rock, "do you think there's something fundamentally wrong with what we're doing?" The question had been forming in my mind for weeks, but this was the first time I'd voiced it directly. Not wrong in terms of ethics or effectiveness, but wrong in terms of fit with how business was supposed to work. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring out the passenger window at the Texas landscape rolling past. "I think," he said finally, "that we're doing something that threatens people who've built their expertise around the way things have always been done." His observation resonated with something I'd been struggling to articulate. The resistance we faced wasn't typically about our results, which were consistently strong. It was about our methods, which didn't align with how people expected marketing agencies to operate. Traditional agencies sold comprehensive packages with standardized pricing and predictable deliverables. We sold customized strategies based on deep understanding of individual business contexts. Conventional wisdom said, digital marketing success required large budgets and extensive campaigns. Our approach achieved better results through authentic relationship building and community engagement. Industry standards emphasized metrics like reach and impressions. We focused on conversion rates and long-term customer value. The problem, Marcus continued, isn't that we're wrong. It's that we're different, and different feels risky to people whose job is to minimize risk. As we drove through the small towns between Dallas and Austin, I found myself thinking about my parents' experience as immigrants. They'd faced similar skepticism when they'd opened the Golden Dragon, not because their food was bad or their business plan was flawed, but because they were doing something that didn't fit local expectations about what a restaurant should be. The comparison was imperfect, but it highlighted something important about the nature of innovation. New approaches always faced resistance, not because they didn't work, but because they challenged existing power structures and conventional wisdom. Back in Austin, I spent the evening walking through my neighborhood, trying to process the emotional impact of what felt like constant rejection from people who should have been natural allies. The rational part of my mind understood that we were building something valuable and sustainable, but the emotional part was beginning to feel bruised by the repeated experience of having to defend obvious successes. The wound wasn't just professional disappointment. It was the accumulating weight of being consistently misunderstood and undervalued by people whose approval I'd thought would validate the choices I'd made. When my phone rang, I almost didn't answer. Patricia Williams' name appeared on the screen, and I wasn't sure I had the energy for another business conversation that might contain more rejection or criticism. "Sarah," Patricia's voice was warm but concerned when I finally picked up. "I heard about the Dallas meeting. Ashley filled me in on what happened." Patricia had been my mentor since before I'd started Pulse Creative, and she'd supported me through every major decision and challenge of the past 3 years. Her opinion mattered to me in ways that other people's didn't, partly because she understood entrepreneurship from personal experience, and partly because she'd never steered me wrong. "It's becoming a pattern," I told her, settling onto a bench in Zilker Park as the sun set over Lady Bird Lake. "Every time we try to expand or take on bigger opportunities, we run into people who can't see past their preconceptions about how business should work." "Tell me about the pattern," Patricia said, and I could hear her settling in for a longer conversation. Over the next 30 minutes, I walked Patricia through the series of rejections and skeptical encounters we'd faced. Robert Martinez's investment decision, Jessica's interference, Rebecca's advisory team, and several smaller incidents that had created a cumulative sense of swimming against an invisible current. Patricia listened without interrupting, occasionally asking clarifying questions that helped me articulate aspects of the experience I hadn't fully processed. "Sarah," she said when I'd finished, "what you're describing isn't unusual for entrepreneurs who are building something genuinely innovative. The resistance you're encountering is actually evidence that you're doing something significant." That's what Marcus said, but it doesn't make it feel any less frustrating. "Of course not," Patricia agreed. "But here's what I want you to consider. The people who are rejecting your approach aren't your target market. They're not the clients who will benefit most from what you offer, and they're not the investors or partners who will help you scale most effectively." Patricia's voice took on the tone she used when delivering particularly important insights. When I was building my first agency 20 years ago, I faced similar resistance from established players who couldn't understand why clients would pay premium rates for what they saw as hand-holding and relationship management. They were focused on delivering technical services efficiently. I was focused on delivering transformational outcomes sustainably. She paused, letting me absorb the parallel. The agencies that criticized my approach weren't wrong about their own business models. They were just measuring success by different criteria. And the clients who hired them were looking for different outcomes than the clients who hired me. Patricia's perspective helped me understand something crucial about the resistance we'd been encountering. We weren't facing rejection because our approach was flawed. We were facing rejection because we were targeting the wrong audience with the right message or the right audience with the wrong message. The question, Patricia continued, is whether you want to modify your approach to appeal to people who will never fully appreciate it, or whether you want to get better at identifying and reaching the people who will. When I returned to the YZI office the next morning, I found Marcus already deep in research mode, his desk covered with printed articles and his computer screen displaying multiple browser tabs. "What are you working on?" I asked, setting down coffee for both of us. "I've been thinking about what happened in Dallas," he said, "and I want to understand whether we're dealing with a regional difference in business culture or something more fundamental." Marcus had spent the evening researching successful agencies that had faced similar challenges when trying to scale beyond their original markets. His findings were both encouraging and sobering. "Look at this," he said, showing me case studies of companies that had eventually achieved significant growth despite initial resistance from traditional business advisors and investors. The pattern is pretty consistent. Companies that are doing something genuinely innovative almost always face a period where they're too advanced for early adopters, but not yet proven enough for mainstream acceptance. He pulled up a particular case study that resonated strongly with our situation. This digital marketing agency started in Portland and tried to expand to Los Angeles. They had excellent results and satisfied clients, but they couldn't get traction with LA businesses because their approach was too different from what local advisors and consultants were recommending. Marcus scrolled down to show the resolution. Instead of trying to fit into the LA market expectations, they went back to Portland and spent 2 years becoming so successful that their reputation preceded them. When they tried LA again, businesses sought them out specifically because they were different, not despite it. The lesson was clear but challenging. We had 2 options: modify our approach to fit existing market expectations, or become so successful that market expectations would adjust to accommodate us. "What do you think?" Marcus asked. I looked around our Austin office, at the client testimonials on the walls, at the team we'd built, at the evidence of everything we'd accomplished by staying true to our methodology. I think we stop trying to convince skeptics and start focusing on the clients who are ready for what we offer. Over the following weeks, we completely restructured our business development approach. Instead of pursuing opportunities that required extensive education about our methodology, we focused on finding businesses that were already frustrated with conventional marketing approaches. Instead of trying to appeal to traditional business advisors We developed relationships with progressive consultants and mentors who understood the value of innovative strategies. Instead of competing on price or trying to match industry standards, we positioned ourselves as a premium option for businesses that prioritized authentic relationships and sustainable growth over quick fixes and conventional metrics. The shift required significant changes in how we presented ourselves and who we targeted. But it also aligned much better with our actual strengths and the value we created for clients. Ashley took the lead on developing new client profiles that identified the characteristics of businesses that were most likely to appreciate our approach. She discovered that our best clients typically shared certain traits. They were owner-operated rather than managed by hired executives. They prioritized long-term relationships over short-term transactions, and they were willing to invest in strategies that took time to develop but created lasting competitive advantages. Marcus focused on building relationships with business mentors and advisors who shared our philosophy about sustainable growth and authentic marketing. He identified a network of consultants, coaches, and industry experts who could refer clients to us specifically because we offered something different from mainstream options. I concentrated on developing case studies and presentations that demonstrated our value in terms that progressive business owners would find compelling. Instead of defending our differences, we highlighted them as advantages. The emotional wound of repeated rejection began to heal as we shifted from trying to fit into celebrating what made us distinct. The process wasn't immediate, and there were still moments when skepticism from potential clients or partners stung more than it should have. But gradually, I began to understand that the resistance we'd encountered wasn't a verdict on our worth or potential. It was simply information about compatibility and market readiness. One afternoon, about 6 weeks into our new approach, I received a call that illustrated the difference our shift in strategy was making. "Is this Sarah Chen from Pulse Creative?" the caller asked. "My name is David Kim, and I own a small chain of organic grocery stores in Houston. I've been hearing about your work from several people in my network, and I'm wondering if we could talk." David had been struggling with exactly the kind of challenges we specialized in solving: how to build customer loyalty in a competitive market, how to communicate the value of higher quality products, how to create community around shared values rather than just convenient shopping. But what made the conversation different from previous client inquiries was David's opening question. "I understand that your approach is different from typical marketing agencies," he said. "Can you tell me about what makes you different and why that's better for businesses like mine?" Instead of having to defend our differences, I was being asked to explain them as advantages. David had already been educated about the limitations of conventional marketing approaches by other consultants in his network. He was specifically seeking an alternative. The conversation lasted over an hour, covering strategy, methodology, and philosophy in ways that felt collaborative rather than defensive. David understood immediately why our approach would serve his business better than conventional options. "When can we start?" he asked at the end of our call. As I hung up the phone, I realized that the wound of repeated rejection was finally healing. We'd found our people, business owners who were looking for what we offered, advisors who understood why our approach was valuable, and partners who could help us reach clients who were ready for innovation rather than convention. The pattern of resistance hadn't disappeared, but it no longer felt personal or devastating. We understood now that not everyone was our client, and that was not only okay but necessary for building a sustainable business. Marcus noticed the change in my energy immediately. "Good call?" he asked, looking up from his computer. "Great. Call," I confirmed. "I think we're finally focusing on the right market. The people who are looking for us instead of the people we're trying to convince?" Exactly. Over the following months, our client roster grew with businesses that appreciated our methodology rather than merely tolerating it. The quality of our client relationships improved dramatically because we were working with people who understood and valued what we brought to their operations. More importantly, the emotional toll of constant skepticism disappeared. When we occasionally encountered resistance or rejection, it felt like a mismatch rather than a judgment. We'd learned to distinguish between productive criticism that could help us improve and resistance that simply reflected different values or priorities. The wound had taught us something crucial about entrepreneurship. Success wasn't about winning over skeptics or fitting into existing categories. It was about finding the people who were ready for what we offered and serving them so well that our reputation would eventually speak for itself. Looking back, I could see that the period of repeated rejection had been necessary for our development. It had forced us to clarify our value proposition, identify our ideal clients, and build the confidence that came from understanding exactly what we were offering and why it was valuable. The pattern of resistance would probably never disappear entirely. Innovation always challenged established norms, and challenge always provoked defensive responses from people invested in the status quo. But now we understood that the resistance wasn't about us personally. It was about the inevitable friction between new approaches and established systems. And instead of trying to eliminate that friction, we'd learned to use it as a navigation tool, pointing us toward the opportunities and relationships that would serve our growth most effectively. The wound had healed, but it had left us stronger and more focused than we'd been before experiencing it. We knew who we were, who we served, and why that mattered. And that clarity would prove invaluable as we faced the next phase of challenges and opportunities in building Pulse Creative into something truly significant. The complications. Just as we were beginning to hit our stride with the new client-focused strategy, my personal life decided to add its own layer of complexity to an already challenging situation. The call came on a Tuesday morning in early March, while I was reviewing proposals for 3 potential clients who had specifically sought us out because of our innovative approach. "Sarah, it's Mom. We need to talk." The tone in Linda Chen's voice immediately triggered my anxiety response. My mother had never been one for dramatic phone calls, but there was something in her carefully controlled delivery that suggested this conversation was going to be significant. "Is everything okay? Are you and Dad all right?" "We're fine physically," she said, with an emphasis that suggested other aspects of their well-being might be in question. "But we need to discuss something important about the restaurant." The Golden Dragon had been struggling more than my parents had let on. Over the past 8 months, their customer base had been slowly declining as newer, trendier restaurants opened in Cedar Park. The demographic shift in their neighborhood meant fewer families who appreciated traditional Taiwanese cuisine, and more young professionals who preferred fusion restaurants and food trucks. "We've been thinking about selling," my mother said quietly. The words hit me like a physical blow. The Golden Dragon wasn't just my parents' business. It was their identity, their connection to the community they'd served for over 2 decades, their legacy in America. "Mom, are you sure? Have you considered other options?" "What other options?" she asked, frustration creeping into her voice. "We're 68 and 70 years old, Sarah. We can't compete with these trendy new places that serve American food with Asian fusion labels. We don't understand social media or delivery apps or whatever else restaurants need to survive now." The irony wasn't lost on me. My parents were struggling with exactly the kind of challenges that Pulse Creative specialized in solving. But they'd never seriously considered asking for my help with their business beyond the presentation Marcus and I had given months earlier. "Have you thought about implementing some of the digital marketing strategies we discussed?" I asked carefully. "Sweetheart, we appreciate what you're trying to do with your computer business, but our problems are bigger than posting pictures on Facebook." There it was again, the dismissive characterization of my work that had stung for years. But now, instead of feeling personally wounded, I was frustrated by the opportunity my parents were missing. "Mom, digital marketing isn't just posting pictures. It's about connecting with customers who value what you offer, building community around authentic experiences, helping people discover businesses that serve their needs." "That sounds very nice in theory," my mother replied. but theory doesn't pay rent or cover food costs. Before I could respond, she continued with news that made the situation exponentially more complicated. Jessica has offered to help us transition the restaurant sale and find something smaller to manage. She thinks we should consider a franchise opportunity that would be less stressful and more predictable. Of course, Jessica was involved. My sister's solution to any complex problem was to find the most conventional, risk-averse path forward. In her mind, helping our parents sell their life's work to buy into a franchise system probably seemed like responsible financial planning. "When are you meeting with Jessica about this?" I asked. "Sunday dinner. She's bringing some materials about franchise opportunities she's researched." Sunday dinner. The weekly family gathering that had been the source of so much tension and disappointment over the years was now going to be the venue for decisions that could fundamentally alter my family's future. "I'd like to be part of that conversation," I said. "Sarah, this is really a matter for the family to discuss." The phrase stung in a way that my mother probably hadn't intended. After years of marriage, after building a successful business, after finally earning some grudging respect for my professional accomplishments, I was still being categorized as somehow separate from the family when important decisions needed to be made. "I am family, Mom, and I have relevant professional experience that might be helpful in evaluating your options." There was a long pause before my mother responded. "Of course you're family. I just meant that this is about the restaurant. Business, which is different from your marketing work." But it wasn't different, and that was exactly the point. The challenges facing the Golden Dragon were precisely the kind of problems that our methodology had solved for dozens of other family-owned restaurants. My parents were considering selling their legacy because they couldn't envision alternatives that didn't exist within their framework of understanding. After we hung up, I sat staring at my computer screen, trying to process the multiple layers of frustration and sadness that the conversation had triggered. My parents were facing a crisis that I was uniquely qualified to help them solve, but they couldn't see past their preconceptions about what my work actually involved. Marcus found me in my office 20 minutes later, still staring blankly at the same spreadsheet. "Everything okay?" he asked, settling into the chair across from my desk with the practiced ease of someone who'd become skilled at reading my moods. I explained the situation with my parents, Jessica's involvement, and the upcoming Sunday dinner that would apparently determine the future of the Golden Dragon. "So let me get this straight," Marcus said when I'd finished. "Your parents are considering selling a restaurant that's been profitable for 20 years because they can't figure out how to adapt to changing market conditions." "That's about right." "And your sister, who has no experience in restaurant operations or small business management, is advising them to liquidate their assets and buy into a franchise system." "Yep." "And they haven't seriously considered asking you, a marketing professional who specializes in helping family restaurants thrive in competitive markets, for strategic advice?" "Because what I do is computer stuff that doesn't apply to real business problems." Marcus was quiet for a moment, absorbing the full scope of the irony. "Sarah, this isn't just about your parents' restaurant. This is about your entire family's inability to see your professional expertise as relevant to their actual challenges." He was right, and that realization made the situation even more painful. This wasn't just a business problem or a family conflict. It was a fundamental failure of communication and understanding that had been years in the making. "What are you going to do?" Marcus asked. "I'm going to Sunday dinner," I said. "And I'm going to present an alternative to selling. That's based on actual data, rather than assumptions about what's possible. Want help preparing the presentation?" "Actually, yes. I think this situation calls for the full pulse creative treatment." Over the next 4 days, Marcus and I developed the most comprehensive restaurant turnaround strategy we'd ever created. We researched the Cedar Park market, analyzed demographic trends, studied the competition, and identified specific opportunities for the Golden Dragon to differentiate itself and rebuild its customer base. But more importantly, we developed a presentation that demonstrated how our methodology could be applied to the specific challenges my parents were facing. Instead of abstract discussions about digital marketing, we created concrete examples of how other family restaurants had successfully navigated similar transitions. The strategy we developed was thorough but not overwhelming, innovative but not threatening to my parents' core identity as restaurateurs. We identified ways to honor their traditional Taiwanese recipes while making them accessible to changing neighborhood demographics. We proposed community engagement initiatives that would build on relationships they'd already established. We outlined digital marketing approaches that would amplify their existing strengths rather than requiring them to adopt entirely new business models. Most importantly, we calculated the financial impact of our recommendations, showing how implementation costs compared to the expenses and risks of selling the restaurant and investing in a franchise opportunity. Sunday arrived with unseasonable warmth for early March, one of those perfect Austin days that made me remember why I'd chosen to build my life in this city. I drove to my parents' house with a folder of materials and a determination to prove that their challenges weren't insurmountable. Jessica was already there when I arrived, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open and several printed reports spread in front of her. She looked up when I walked in, her expression shifting from surprise to mild annoyance. "I didn't know you were coming," she said. "I asked Sarah to join us," my mother interjected quickly, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely comfortable with having made that decision. My father appeared from the living room, wearing the expression he adopted for serious family discussions. Slightly formal, carefully neutral, prepared for potential conflict. "Should we wait for David and the kids?" I asked, referring to Jessica's family. "They're not coming," Jessica replied. "This is a business discussion, not a social visit." The distinction felt pointed, though I wasn't sure if it was intended to exclude me or simply to emphasize the seriousness of the conversation. For the next 30 minutes, Jessica presented her research on franchise opportunities that might appeal to my parents. She'd identified several Asian food concepts that offered turnkey operations, established brand recognition, and corporate support for marketing and management. Her presentation was thorough and professionally prepared, covering initial investment, costs, ongoing franchise fees, expected profit margins, and operational requirements. She'd clearly spent significant time researching options and developing recommendations. But what struck me most was how completely her analysis ignored the emotional and personal factors that made the Golden Dragon meaningful to my parents. Jessica was presenting franchise opportunities as if my parents were investors looking for the most efficient way to deploy capital, rather than entrepreneurs who'd built their identities around serving their community. The beauty of the franchise model, Jessica concluded, is that you don't have to worry about marketing or menu development or staying current with industry trends. The corporation handles all of that, and you just focus on daily operations. My parents listened politely, asking occasional questions about specific details, but I could see them struggling with the fundamental premise of Jessica's recommendations. They weren't entrepreneurs because they wanted passive income from a corporate system. They were entrepreneurs because they wanted to create something meaningful and personal. When Jessica finished her presentation, my mother looked at me expectantly. "Sarah, you said you had some thoughts about alternatives?" I opened my folder and began with the question that I hoped would reframe the entire conversation. "Before we talk about whether to sell the Golden Dragon, can we talk about what makes it special to you? What would you miss most if it was gone?" My father answered immediately, as if he'd been waiting for someone to ask. "The relationships," he said. "The customers who've been coming for 15 years, who bring their children now, who trust us to take care of them when they want authentic food made with care." My mother nodded emphatically. "And the recipes. Your grandmother's recipes that I learned to make properly, that connect us to our culture and family history. The feeling of being part of this community," my father added, "of contributing something valuable that people appreciate. As my parents described what mattered to them about the Golden Dragon, I could see Jessica growing impatient with what she probably viewed as sentimental considerations that didn't address practical business realities. "Those are all wonderful things," she interjected. "But feelings don't pay the bills. If the restaurant isn't profitable, all the sentimental value in the world won't help." "But what if the restaurant could be profitable while preserving everything that makes it meaningful?" I asked. For the next hour, I walked my family through our analysis of the Golden Dragon's challenges and opportunities. I showed them how demographic changes in Cedar Park actually created opportunities for authentic ethnic dining that wasn't available elsewhere in the area. I demonstrated how digital marketing could help them reach food enthusiasts throughout Austin who would drive to Cedar Park for the kind of traditional Taiwanese cuisine they offered. Most importantly, I presented a detailed plan for increasing revenue and rebuilding customer base without compromising the values and relationships that made the restaurant special to them. These projections assume we implement a comprehensive community engagement and digital marketing strategy, I explained, showing them month-by-month revenue estimates based on our experience with similar clients. The initial investment is about 30% of what you'd spend on a franchise fee, and the potential upside is significantly higher. My parents asked detailed questions about timeline, implementation requirements, and expected outcomes. They were clearly intrigued by the possibility of preserving their life's work while addressing the financial challenges they were facing. But Jessica was skeptical about every aspect of the proposal. "Sarah, these projections are based on best-case scenarios," she argued. "What happens if the digital marketing doesn't work? What happens if the demographics continue to shift? What happens if mom and dad can't keep up with all these new systems and technologies?" Her questions weren't unreasonable, but they reflected a fundamental assumption that preservation and growth were inherently riskier than liquidation and transition to franchise ownership. "Every business decision involves risk," I replied. "The question is which risks are worth taking based on potential outcomes and personal values." "Personal values don't matter if the business fails," Jessica countered. "And financial security doesn't matter if you lose everything that made the work meaningful in the first place." The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with Jessica and me essentially presenting competing philosophies about business, risk, and success. My parents listened to both perspectives, asking questions and occasionally exchanging glances that suggested they were having their own internal conversation about our recommendations. Finally, my father spoke with the authority that he'd always used to settle family disputes. "We need time to think about both options. Jessica, we appreciate the research you've done on franchises. Sarah, we appreciate the strategy you've developed for the restaurant. Give us a week to discuss this privately, and we'll let you know what we decide." As we gathered our materials and prepared to leave, I realized that the complications went deeper than just business strategy or family dynamics. This situation was forcing all of us to confront fundamental questions about what we valued, what we feared, and how we defined success. For my parents, the decision wasn't just about financial security or business efficiency. It was about identity, legacy, and the meaning they derived from 20 years of entrepreneurship. For Jessica, the situation seemed to trigger her deepest fears about financial risk and the unpredictability of small business ownership. Her recommendations were driven by a genuine desire to protect our parents from potential loss, even if that protection came at the cost of personal fulfillment. For me, the stakes felt even higher. This wasn't just about saving my parents' restaurant or proving the value of my professional expertise. It was about whether my family could ever see me as someone whose opinions and abilities were worth taking seriously. The drive home from my parents' house felt like traveling between different worlds. In one world, I was a successful entrepreneur whose expertise was sought after by clients throughout Texas. In another world, I was still the family member whose unconventional choices made everyone nervous, whose professional accomplishments were viewed as temporary experiments rather than lasting achievements. The complication was that both worlds were real, and I was trying to live authentically in both of them simultaneously. The challenge would be finding a way to bridge them without compromising either my family relationships or my professional integrity. As I pulled into my driveway, I realized that the next week would determine more than just the future of the Golden Dragon. It would determine whether I could ever truly integrate my professional and personal identities, or whether I would always feel like I was living two separate lives that never quite connected. The week that followed our family meeting felt like living in suspended animation. Every morning I'd wake up wondering if today would be the day my parents called with their decision about the Golden Dragon. Every evening I'd go to bed replaying conversations and analyzing subtle cues that might hint at which direction they were leaning. Marcus watched me cycle through this emotional roller coaster with the patience of someone who'd become accustomed to my tendency to overthink family situations. On Wednesday, he finally intervened with characteristic directness. "Sarah, you're driving yourself crazy waiting for an outcome you can't control," he said, finding me staring out the office window instead of working on client presentations. "What if we focused on something we can control instead?" "Like what?" "Like making sure we're prepared for whatever they decide." Marcus had been thinking strategically about the situation while I'd been processing it emotionally. If my parents chose to implement our restaurant strategy, we needed to be ready to deliver results that would justify their trust. If they decided to sell and pursue Jessica's franchise recommendation, we needed to be prepared to support them through that transition while maintaining our family relationships. "You're right," I admitted. "I've been so focused on wanting them to choose our option that I haven't been thinking about how to succeed regardless of what they decide." Over the next 3 days, Marcus and I refined our Golden Dragon strategy into a detailed implementation plan that could be executed immediately if my parents gave us the green light. We identified specific vendors, outlined week-by-week timelines, and developed contingency plans for potential challenges. But we also researched franchise consulting services and transition strategies that could help my parents if they chose Jessica's recommendation. The goal wasn't to hedge our bets, but to demonstrate that we supported their right to make whatever decision felt right for them. The call came on Friday afternoon, just as I was preparing to leave the office early for the first time in weeks. "Sarah, it's Mom. Do you have time to talk?" "Of course. What did you and Dad decide?" "We want to try your plan for the restaurant." I felt a surge of relief and excitement that was immediately tempered by the weight of responsibility that came with their trust. "But," my mother continued, "we have conditions." I settled back into my desk chair, prepared for whatever requirements they felt necessary to make this work. "We want to start small, with a 3-month trial period. If we don't see significant improvement by then, we reserve the right to reconsider Jessica's franchise recommendations." "That's completely reasonable. And we want to pay your regular consulting rates. This needs to be a professional arrangement, not a family favor that creates weird dynamics if it doesn't work out." The request surprised me, but it also demonstrated something important about how my parents were thinking about this decision. They weren't asking for help as a desperate last resort. They were making a business decision to hire professional services. "I appreciate that, Mom. Marcus and I will prepare a formal proposal and contract." "There's one more thing," my mother said, her voice taking on a tone that suggested this final condition was the most important. "Jessica is concerned about the risk we're taking, and she's asked to be involved in monitoring the results. We'd like her to receive regular reports on our progress." This condition was more challenging than the others, not because Jessica's oversight would be problematic, but because it meant our success would be measured not just by objective business metrics, but by Jessica's subjective assessment of whether the risk had been worthwhile. "That's fine," I said, though I made a mental note to discuss with Marcus how to present results in ways that would be compelling to someone who was predisposed to skepticism about our approach. "When can we start?" my mother asked. "Monday, if you're ready." That weekend, Marcus and I worked around the clock to finalize every detail of the Golden Dragon transformation. We confirmed vendor relationships, scheduled initial community, outreach events, prepared social media content calendars, and coordinated the technology implementations that would support the entire strategy. But more importantly, we developed a communication plan that would keep my parents informed about every aspect of our work and provide Jessica with the detailed progress reports she'd requested. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp April weather that made Austin feel like the most optimistic city in the world. Marcus and I met my parents at the Golden Dragon before opening hours to begin the implementation process. Walking into the restaurant that morning felt different than it had during our previous visits. Instead of being their daughter with opinions about their business, I was their consultant with a job to do. The shift in dynamic was subtle but significant. "Where do we start?" my father asked, his voice carrying the mixture of excitement and nervousness that accompanies any major change. "With understanding exactly what you want to preserve and what you're willing to adapt," I replied, pulling out the detailed questionnaire Marcus and I had prepared. For the next 2 hours, we conducted the kind of comprehensive business analysis that we typically completed for new clients. We discussed their menu, their pricing, their customer demographics, their operational procedures, and their long-term goals. But we also talked about things that went beyond standard business consulting. Family recipes that had cultural significance, regular customers who felt like extended family, traditions that connected the Golden Dragon to their identity as immigrants, who'd built something meaningful in America. The strategy needs to honor what's authentic about your restaurant while making it more accessible to people who don't yet know they're looking for it, Marcus explained as we reviewed our findings. The first month of implementation was intense. We launched social media accounts that showcased not just the food, but the stories behind the recipes and the family heritage they represented. We organized community events that invited neighborhood families to learn about Taiwanese culture through cooking demonstrations and cultural celebrations. We partnered with local food bloggers and cultural organizations to increase awareness of the Golden Dragon among Austin's growing population of food enthusiasts who valued authentic ethnic dining experiences. Most importantly, we implemented systems that made it easier for my parents to connect with customers in ways that felt natural to them. Instead of forcing them to adopt unfamiliar technologies, we created processes that amplified their existing strengths in hospitality and relationship building. The results were measurable from the first week. Foot traffic increased by 20%, weekend reservations began filling up consistently, and new customers started discovering the restaurant through online reviews and social media referrals. But the real transformation wasn't just in the numbers. My parents seemed energized in ways I hadn't seen for years. They were excited about cooking again, enthusiastic about meeting new customers, proud of sharing their culture with people who appreciated it. "You know what's interesting?" my mother said during our 3-week check-in meeting. "We're working harder than we were before, but it feels easier because people are excited about what we're doing." My father nodded in agreement. Before, it felt like we were fighting to keep customers. Now it feels like we're welcoming people who want to be here. The monthly reports I sent to Jessica included detailed financial metrics, customer feedback, and operational updates. But I also included photos from community events, customer testimonials, and examples of the cultural connections that were developing around the restaurant. Jessica's responses to these reports evolved over the 3-month trial period. Initially, her feedback focused on potential risks and sustainability concerns. But gradually, her tone shifted to cautious optimism and then to genuine excitement about what we were achieving. The turning point came during the second month, when a food critic from Austin Monthly wrote a feature article about the Golden Dragon's Renaissance. The article positioned my parents as cultural ambassadors who were preserving authentic Taiwanese cuisine while building bridges with their evolving community. "I never expected this kind of recognition," Jessica said when she called after reading the article. "I thought you were taking a huge risk, but this is actually creating opportunities I didn't know were possible." By the end of the 3-month trial period, the results exceeded every projection we'd made. Revenue had increased by 45%, customer retention was at an all-time high, and the Golden Dragon had developed a reputation as one of Austin's most authentic and welcoming ethnic restaurants. But more importantly, my parents had rediscovered their passion for the work they'd been doing for 20 years. They weren't just surviving in a changing market, they were thriving by leaning into what made them unique. The success of the Golden Dragon project transformed more than just my parents' business. It transformed my family's understanding of what I did professionally and why it mattered. My parents began referring potential clients to Pulse Creative, recommending us to other restaurant owners who were struggling with similar challenges. They started talking about my work with the same pride they'd always shown for Jessica's corporate achievements. Most surprisingly, Jessica became one of our strongest advocates. She not only acknowledged that our approach had been more successful than her franchise recommendations, but she began referring clients from her own network who could benefit from our services. "I was wrong about your business," she told me, during a family dinner 6 months after we'd completed the Golden Dragon transformation. "I thought digital marketing was just expensive advertising that didn't create real value. But what you did for Mom and Dad wasn't just marketing. It was strategic business development that honored who they are while helping them reach new possibilities." The acknowledgement from Jessica meant more than I'd expected it would. For years, I'd been frustrated by her inability to understand the value of what I was building. Now she wasn't just understanding it, she was actively supporting it. The transformation in my family relationships created ripple effects that extended far beyond personal satisfaction. My parents' enthusiasm for our work led to referrals that brought us some of our most rewarding clients. Jessica's endorsement helped establish credibility with professional networks that had previously been skeptical of our approach. Most importantly, the experience taught me that the resistance I'd encountered wasn't always permanent or insurmountable. Sometimes it just required patience, consistent results, and the right opportunity to demonstrate value in terms that skeptics could understand and appreciate. 1 year after beginning the Golden Dragon project, Marcus and I were invited to speak at a conference for family-owned restaurants about strategies for adapting to changing markets while preserving cultural authenticity. My parents introduced us at the conference, describing our work not as their daughter's marketing services, but as a comprehensive business transformation that had saved their restaurant and strengthened their community connections. Sitting in the audience, listening to my parents describe our collaboration with such obvious pride and satisfaction, I realized that the journey from exclusion to integration was finally complete. I was no longer trying to prove my worth to my family or seeking their approval for my professional choices. Instead, we were working together as partners who respected each other's expertise and shared common goals. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been easy. It had required persistence through rejection, clarity about my values and capabilities, and the willingness to demonstrate worth through results rather than arguments. But ultimately, the very challenges that had made me feel excluded from my family had created the skills and perspective that allowed me to contribute to their success in ways that conventional approaches couldn't match. After the conference, as Marcus and I drove back to Austin, I reflected on how different this felt from the countless other drives we'd taken over the past 3 years. Instead of processing rejection or planning defensive strategies, we were discussing expansion opportunities and new client referrals. "You know what I realized today?" Marcus said as we passed the exit for Cedar Park. "The story of Pulse Creative isn't really about building a marketing agency. It's about proving that different doesn't mean wrong, and that innovation comes from understanding what people actually need rather than what they think they want." He was right. We'd built our business not by conforming to industry standards or meeting conventional expectations, but by developing genuine expertise in helping clients achieve outcomes that mattered to them. The resistance we'd faced along the way hadn't been a verdict on our potential. It had been information about market readiness and compatibility, and learning to distinguish between productive criticism and uninformed skepticism had made us more effective at serving the clients who were ready for what we offered. 2 weeks later, I received a call that illustrated how completely the dynamics had shifted. "Sarah, this is Robert Martinez. I believe we met about a year ago regarding a potential investment in Pulse Creative." I remembered Robert very clearly, though I was surprised to hear from him again. "I've been following your work through several mutual connections," he continued, "and I'm wondering if you might be interested in revisiting our previous conversation. I think I may have misunderstood the scope and potential of what you're building." The conversation that followed was completely different from our initial meeting. Instead of Robert evaluating whether Pulse Creative was worth investing in, he was trying to understand how he could be part of what we were building. "I've heard from 3 different business owners about the transformations you've helped them achieve," he said. "The kind of results you're generating suggests that you're not just providing marketing services. You're providing strategic business development that creates lasting competitive advantages." Robert's new assessment was accurate. Over the past year, our client work had evolved beyond traditional marketing into comprehensive business transformation that helped companies align their operations with their values while achieving sustainable growth. "Would you be open to a meeting to discuss partnership opportunities?" Robert asked. "I'd be interested in exploring that," I replied, though this time from a position of strength rather than desperation. As I hung up the phone, I realized that the rejection Robert had given us a year earlier had actually been a gift. It had forced us to develop our capabilities more thoroughly, build our reputation more systematically, and clarify our value proposition more precisely. Now, instead of needing external validation to prove our worth, we had developed enough credibility that investors were seeking us out. Marcus, who had overheard my end of the conversation, looked up from his computer with a knowing smile. "How the tables have turned," he observed. Indeed they have. That evening, I called my parents to share the news about Robert's renewed interest in investing in Pulse Creative. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," my mother said, her voice warm with genuine pride. "You've built something really special." "We've built something special," I corrected. "The Golden Dragon Project taught me things about family business dynamics that I couldn't have learned any other way. Your trust in our approach gave us the credibility we needed to reach this point." My father joined the conversation from the kitchen phone. "Sarah, we want you to know how proud we are of what you've accomplished, not just with our restaurant, but with your whole business. You saw possibilities that we couldn't see, and you had the courage to pursue them even when people didn't understand." The pride in his voice was unmistakable, and it represented a complete transformation from the skepticism and concern they'd expressed for years about my unconventional career choices. "Jessica wants to talk to you too," my mother added. "She has some ideas about potential clients in her network who might benefit from your services." 6 months later, Pulse Creative had grown to a team of 15 people serving clients across Texas and neighboring states. We'd opened a second office in Dallas, developed strategic partnerships with business consultants throughout the Southwest, and created a methodology that other agencies were beginning to study and adapt. But more importantly, we'd built a business that aligned with our values while creating meaningful impact for clients and their communities. The resistance and rejection we'd faced along the way had forced us to become better at what we did, clearer about what we offered, and more confident about the value we created. The transformation was complete, but it hadn't been the one I'd originally expected. Instead of convincing skeptics to appreciate our approach, we'd found clients who were looking for exactly what we offered. Instead of changing our methodology to fit conventional expectations, we'd developed it more thoroughly until it became an alternative that conventional approaches couldn't match. And instead of seeking approval from family members who couldn't understand our work, we demonstrated its value through results that were impossible to dismiss or misinterpret. The journey from exclusion to empowerment had required persistence, clarity, and the willingness to trust our instincts even when intelligent people were offering compelling reasons to doubt them. But it had led to outcomes that exceeded anything I could have imagined when I'd started Pulse Creative 3 years earlier. As I stood in our expanded office, watching our team work with clients who genuinely appreciated our approach, I understood that the most important transformation hadn't been in our business metrics or family relationships. It had been in my understanding of what success actually meant. Success wasn't about winning over people who were never going to appreciate what we offered. It was about serving the people who were looking for exactly what we could provide, and doing it so well that our reputation would speak for itself. The assistant who had whispered in my parents' ear hadn't shared a secret or revealed hidden information. Marcus had simply found a way to help them see what had always been there. A daughter who had built something valuable, meaningful, and sustainable by staying true to her vision, even when it differed from their expectations. And in the end, that recognition had transformed not just their understanding of my work, but their appreciation for the courage it had taken to pursue it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.